Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. Today we're going to build out an accessible tab component from scratch, and we're going to use just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, I have a few things I just want to mention as I show you kind of how this works. Number one, obviously you can come in here and click on these tabs, but we've done a few other kind of cool styling things. For instance, on these vertical tabs, which I've got some horizontal tabs below, but as you scroll, they actually stay stuck to the top of the page, so that as you're scrolling, you can just click the next one and jump back up and start reading it. You could even add it where it jumps up here if you want to, or something like that, but I thought that was a nice little touch. Number two, on these horizontal ones here, we've got the same process and it works just the same. But what really starts to kind of take this to the next level is the accessibility that we're going to add. So if I come in here and I just tab, I'm going to start at wherever I'm selected there, number 4. And then if I hit the up arrow on these vertical ones, it'll let me kind of focus or start to hover over that next one. And then I click it and it'll actually switch to it. Also, if I hit tab, it'll actually just jump to the panel itself, and like on screen readers and things like that, it'll read it for us. But if I keep going, it'll actually jump straight to the second section. And then here, if I hit the right arrow, it's going to jump over. If I hit up and down, it's not going to do anything. If I hit the right arrow, though, it will jump over. And again, if I hit enter or spacebar, it will go ahead and select that next tab. Hit tab again, it should select the next area. And then again, you can kind of go through the process again on this third one that's also a vertical tab selector. Now, you can actually see how this sounds on a screen reader or any page on your site. And at least on a Mac, I know it's Command Function F5.
VoiceOver on Step 4. Selected tab 3 of 4. Steps to learn JS. Tab group. You are currently on a selected tab 3 of 4.
And you see how it's actually telling you which tab you're selected on. And if I go to the next one, it'll actually preview that it's Step 4 of 4.
Step 4 tab 4 of 4. You are currently on a tab 4 of 4. To select this option, press Control Option Space.
And you can see how that works. Let me turn that off just so you can still hear what's going on.
Step 4 VoiceOver off.
By doing it this way, you're actually going to hear how the tabs will be read out. All right, now I've shown you a lot about how it works. Let me just mention a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to accessibility, the reason I wanted to do it this way is things like a tab component are kind of notoriously poor if you just build them out yourself, which is why most of the time you should use some kind of framework or something like that because they've actually thought through the accessibility concerns. So if you're going to do this, you need to do it the right way. And we shouldn't think about accessibility as doing people a favor. It's doing your job. And I realize that a lot of times when you learn HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you don't learn accessibility. And that's actually kind of been one of the things I've been battling against myself. And so what I want to start doing is including these as much as possible when you build it out, because it really is part of the base structure of any good site. And so I'm going to try to do that more often on my channel. It'll take a little bit longer, but again, we're all going to need these at one point in our lives, either now or later. Today will just be HTML and CSS. In the next video, we're going to focus on JavaScript primarily from an object-oriented programming mindset, which I haven't done much before. So I should say that this series will be a little bit more advanced for what I've typically done on my channel. I don't think it's something you can't keep up with, but if you struggle at all, let me know, or you can jump to another one of my tutorials to kind of get the base components down of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right, well, that's way too much talking. Let me show you how to get up and started, and then we'll get going. So first of all, if you come to this GitHub link and you go ahead and select this first branch, you can just download the code here with me, or you can, of course, clone the whole thing and then just navigate to the right branch. Either way, we're going to start at lesson 1 starting point. Second thing is you're going to need some kind of live server, especially when we get into the JavaScript later on. And so I've got this pulled up in VS Code, and there's a great extension here called live server right here. So you can just search for this extension, install it, and then there's usually like a little live button down here. You just click. That's what I've done, and it's pulled it up over this way. Now, as you can see so far, we don't have too much going on. I basically have the base styling, and I'll pull this up here, the base styling for everything that's not a tab. And then I have the base HTML for everything that's not a tab, including a link to our style sheet. All right, so let me close that side panel, and let's go ahead and start building out the HTML first. Let's go ahead and start by adding an article tag here with the class of wrapper. And when I do that and expand it out here, we're going to add up top here H2 that says step 1, learn HTML. And I'll expand that out. Now the two things below, the buttons and the panels, will all live inside of one div with a class of tabs wrapper, like this. We need to add a few attributes to this div as well. We're going to add a custom data attribute, which you can just do data dash and whatever you want. So I'm going to name it data dash direction. And this first one will be vertical. And then we're going to add an ID to this. We'll just say, let's see, list 1, something like that. Okay, so now I'm going to come in here. We're going to add those two sections. So we're going to have a div here, and this will have a couple attributes here. We're going to have a role of tab list. That's important for accessibility, and it's just good semantics to group your tabs together like this. Then we're going to give it an aria label, which again will be for accessibility. This is what is going to be read out and what you heard being read out when I turned on that voiceover on my Mac. And this first one is just going to be called Steps to Learn HTML, just like that. Now inside of here, we could add these as different things. Sometimes you might see these added as divs or whatever, but it makes sense to add the tabs as buttons because then you get a bunch of accessibility kind of built in. You don't have to do all that yourself. So we're going to add a series of buttons here. Now on this vertical one, we only have a single character, the number 1, but we are going to have a bunch of different attributes on this button itself. So let me expand this out, and just to make it easier to read, I'm going to break them out here. First of all, we're going to need a role of tab, and that will tell the browser that this is one of the tabs. Then we're going to have an aria controls, and this points to the thing that it controls. So what is this tab control? It's going to control something with the ID of step 1 tab. All right, and then we're going to give it its own ID of step 1. Now, if we don't give it an aria label, it's just going to read that number 1, which isn't super helpful. So let's say aria label, and we're going to say this needs to be 1.1, what is HTML? With a question mark like that. And then finally, this one is aria selected, and this tells it whether or not the tab is selected. You might remember it read off selected or whatever. So we're going to say true for this first one because we're going to start by default with this first tab being selected. And because we're going to have multiple step 1s on those other tab groupings, let's go ahead and change this to say HTML step 1 and this one to say HTML step 1, just so we kind of keep track of which one is which. We don't have multiple IDs. Even though it's going to be contained to that tab group, it's still better practice not to have identical IDs. Now you might wonder, where do you kind of learn how to do all this stuff? Well, what I did is I just went to the accessibility templating, and basically this w3.org best practices gives you an example of what this should look like. And so I read through this, and you can see here they tell you keyboard support you should have, and then they mention each of these elements, what they do, why you should use buttons. So they kind of talk you through all this, and as I read through this, if I understand it correctly, this is what I've tried to implement. Now, you may see something I didn't do correctly, let me know. Again, like I said, I don't think accessibility is taught often, and so I'm really having to teach myself a lot of this, and probably you are too. They actually give you some source code of what it should look like down here for the HTML, and I looked at this. And you see that they've got the panels then listed off down below here as just separate divs, and that's what we're going to do as well. So before we build out the second button, let's come down here below, and I'm going to add a div here. And once again, this div is going to have several attributes. This is the panel itself. As you can see here over here on the right, we're going to add, first of all, a role of tab panel, like that. This tells it it's a tab panel that holds content that the tab will interact with. Now we need to tell it what controls this panel. So we'll do aria, and rather than controls, we're going to do labeled by. And this labeled by is going to point back to the ID HTML step 1. So it's telling it, hey, let's connect these two. Now we need to give it an ID of HTML step 1 tab. Otherwise, the button itself won't know which one it controls. So this ID connects to aria controls, and this ID connects to aria labeled by. Now because this is a div, it's not normally in the sequence of tabs as you tab through a web page. So what we need to do is come down here now, and we're going to add tab index, like that, one word, and then equals 0, which will put it in the normal flow of the document as far as tabbing through it. Inside here, we can do whatever we want, so we can say h3 1.1, what is HTML, like that. And then we'll expand that out. Now in these paragraphs here, we can just add like lorem 40 or something like that, and it should expand out. I guess you can't do it like that. Let's see, lorem 40. There we go. And let's just copy this down a couple times. I did that by holding let's see, shift option, I think. Yeah, shift option, down arrow. And then we can add a button here. I've got a with a class of button, and I can just point it to nothing and say like, learn more, something like that. And I've got that class already predefined in this CSS, so it should work properly. So if I save this and I jump back over this way, you'll see that I've got this button here and then this panel here, and everything's styled nicely because of the CSS we've got set up already. Okay, so we're going to repeat this for 3 more buttons here. So let me go ahead and do that now. And let's see, button 2, button 3, button 4. And then let's just make a few changes here. So what I can do is I can grab this right here and hit Command D several times, and I'll just grab all the next ones. I'll need to change this back to 1 here. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Command D several times once selecting that. We'll change this to 3. And then right here, same thing. We'll change this to 4. So we've got now 4 buttons ready to kind of hit the next sections. Now, these probably should say whatever they're pointed to, but for now, for speed's sake, I'll let you change those. I'm not going to add real content here, so I'm not going to waste your time pretending to. Okay, so the only difference we're going to have with these additional tab panels, let me select this whole tab panel here. I'm going to copy this down. And for each of these 4 tab panels, obviously we need to change this to say step 2 here and step 2 here. But we're going to add one more thing, and let me space this back down just so you can kind of break these out. So our ID, our tab index. For these other ones, they're going to be hidden by default. And you can actually just add an attribute here, hidden, and we're going to set that to true. You can set it to pizza. It doesn't really matter if it has that attribute on it. It's going to hide it by default. Actually, let's just double check that. Does it work if you put pizza? The question of the day, pizza. It's hidden. Okay, I thought so. All right, so you're going to add now 2 more of these panels, and then we're going to add another section that's horizontal. So go ahead and add 2 more of these panels following this instruction, and I'll be right back with you. All right, now how do you know if you did this correctly? Welcome back, by the way. If you come over here to the Elements panel, you should be able to come in here and let's see, inside our container and inside our article, a tabs wrapper, we should have our tab list and then 4 tab panels like this. And you can see they're broken out just like this. So if you get a div off or something like that, you won't have 4 sections. You'll notice that each of these have hidden equals true, although hidden equals pizza now might be my new default. Okay, so we've got that set up properly. And what you're going to do is copy this entire thing down. So let's go ahead and do that now. This whole article from that article tag all the way to this article tag, Option Shift down arrow, and you're going to do another one here. Now, for sake of time, all I'm going to do is change this to say step 2, learn CSS. And then I'm going to come in here and change this direction here to horizontal, like that. And then I should probably change this to learn CSS. And all of these should be changed eventually. So like HTML step 1, let's go ahead and change these HTMLs because I can just select all the ones following this. Oh, I selected the final one too, but we're just going to change this to CSS, and then I'll change this back. So all I did was change all of those IDs. Let's see, all those IDs here to CSS by selecting Command D after I selected the first one so that the IDs are different. Now, if we come down here, we should have step 2 with the 4 buttons and just the first panel visible. Okay, so that's all we're going to do for the HTML. And if you had trouble following that, you can jump ahead in the repo, grab lesson 2 starting point, and grab the text from there. We do need to go ahead and quickly style these, and this actually won't take too long because we've got a lot of the base styling done already. The nice thing about adding HTML properly with aria labels and things like that is you can use those selectors to style your CSS. You don't have to actually add classes as well. So all your tabs are always going to have role equals tab panel or tab panel, depending if it's a button or the panel. So you can use those to style your CSS. So the very first thing we need to account for is our tabs wrapper. This actually had a class on it, and we're just going to say display a flex, and then we'll do flex direction here of column, because by default, that's what we're going to do. And then we'll do a gap of 3 pixels, something like that. And let me just refresh myself here. Tabs wrapper. Tabs wrapper is the thing that holds the tab list and the different panels. Okay, so when it's normal here, we're going to have it stacked like that. So when we have a data attribute on here, a custom data attribute of data direction equals vertical, This is the non-normal way to do it. It's going to be stacked the other way here. Then we want to change this flex direction back to row, which is the default. So I'll jump this up here, and we've got that set now. Okay, so now that we've got that ready to work, let's actually see how we can adjust the role, the tab list itself. So this is the thing that holds the buttons. So we'll say role equals tab list, like that. And then I'll come in here, and we're going to say display a flex, and then align self to flex start. This will keep it at the top here on the vertical. On horizontal, it doesn't do anything, so it's not going to hurt us to keep it on. We're going to have flex wrap set to wrap, which on the horizontal will wrap, on the vertical won't really do anything. And then we'll say gap of 3 pixels as well. Now what we're going to do is we've kind of set the tab list that group those buttons together up. Let's actually now set up what it should look like if it's set to vertical. So we're going to come down here and say when this is the case, we'll do a space here and say the role of tab list should be a little bit different. We're going to set the flex direction here to column, and then we're going to say position needs to be WebKit sticky, like that. And then we're going to copy this down again and say position sticky. That WebKit prefix is necessary, I believe, still for Safari. We'll come in here and say top of 3 pixels, like that. And now you're not going to see anything, especially because I put tap, right, top. If I come over here, though, you'll see now these things are sticking to the top because this is one of our vertical tab groups there. All right, so let's get some styling on those buttons because right now it's kind of hard to see what's going on. So we'll say role equals tab, like this. And then let's set the background color here. And I've got an HSL var background, like that. You might remember from my last video, I think I did, or maybe 2 videos ago, I showed you that I like to wrap my variables here, leave them alone as far as just declare the numbers for HSL and wrap these in HSL so that if I want to, I can come in here and do like 0.2 or something like that. And we'll actually do that, I think, a little bit later in this project, if I remember correctly. All right, now I've got a border here, a 0.5 rem. And we're going to set an outset instead of a solid for the border, and that will make it look kind of 3D. It looks a little bit different on each browser, but I still think it's decent. I like it on Chrome the best, and that's what I'm showing you. So if you don't like it on something else, sorry. All right, cursor of pointer. And then we're going to set your font size here to a variable I've got set up, just called font, or let's see, was it size? I think size 4, something like that. Okay, there we go. Size 3, size 5. Let's say size 5. I think that looks good. The color here then should be our HSL var muted. And then we'll do a font family because this is a button here of inherent. And that will take it from the body. And then we'll do a padding of 0.5 rem and 1.3 rem. That's up and down and left and right. And then a font weight of bold. We'll set a line height to 1. Okay, so that should set that out properly. Now, on the vertical, it looks a little bit odd, but on the horizontal, that's just about right. So let's make a couple of adjustments if we're going to be on the vertical. So we'll come in here, and what we need to do is actually say tabs wrapper, because this is where the data attribute is set dot direction or / direction equals vertical. And then we'll do a space to say inside of that, if there's a role equals tab, then we're going to change a few things. First of all, we're going to set the height to our var of size. Let's do like size 4. I think that might be right. And we'll do the same thing for our width. And what that will do is it'll make it a square button. And actually, let's go ahead and adjust this. Let's see, size 3. What did I have this on? Okay, I think that's right. And then we need to set padding to 0 so that it kind of sits right in the middle. All right, then we got to do a couple other things here. When we come over here and get on the tab itself, we want it to hover and kind of have a different effect when we do that. So I'm going to come in here and say role equals tab, and then we'll do an is selector and say is hover or is focus. So when either of those are true, we want the background color to actually change. So we're going to say HSL and then var accent 1, and as promised, you're going to come in here and say 0.6. So that's why I do the HSL that way, so that when you come in here, you can have this transparent color without having to create some variable up top. Let me copy this down here. We're going to say for the color itself, we want this to be equal to our background, like that. Okay, so when I come in here, that should be white, and the background should be kind of that muted green color. All right, now you might be getting nervous. We haven't even touched the panel yet, but it's because we don't have much to do on it. We've got one more thing though to do on this role of tab. When it has both a role of tab and it has aria selected, set to true, like this, we want to make a few more changes. First of all, we're just going to get rid of that transparency and just change it to accent altogether. And then second, we want a border here of 0.5 rem. We're going to do inset this time, which will again have a 3D effect of kind of pushing the button in. And we're going to set this to inset. And then we're going to use the same as the background color here, like this. And the browser will actually figure out what that should look like. So if I come in here, you see those all look inset here. And I notice a problem I made with my HTML here. You'll notice that all of these are set to aria selected true. That is one way to figure it out. So if I come in here and let's see, aria selected true. So that one's fine. These should be false like this. And if I jump down all the way to the bottom, I should have the same thing. All right, so I changed all those to false as well. Okay, cool. All right, I also need to, let's retain this color actually so that when it's depressed here, it has that same kind of color. All right, last thing, and then we're going to be done with this video. I'm going to come in here and we're going to change, not the role tab, but the role tab panel. Now what I should have done is just copy all this down because I think just about all this we're going to use. So I'll pull this down this way. The border, background color is going to be background like this. The border actually will be the same. And then the color of the text, that's making it all go away. We don't want to change the color of the text. We'll just leave it at default. We do want a padding though. We're going to do a var, size of like 3, something like that. I've got just these different size attributes, maybe 4, make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, that are set up. Okay, so if I come in here, this should be complete for the HTML and the CSS. And you see you can switch between tabs. Nope, just kidding. We haven't done the JavaScript. And these are all set out this way. Now, like I showed you in the demo, you probably want to change these horizontal ones to be something that's actually more than just a number. So like learn CSS something, and that'll actually space out that way. This one might be like cascade it or something. All right, and then maybe let's just do this to make sure they're different. I'll delete the final button here, and then I'll delete the final tab panel. And that way, when we build out the JavaScript, we can try to account for either whatever tab numbers they have and make sure it's actually working rather than just assuming it is. So I'll get rid of those, and now we've got learn it, cascade it, and 3. Okay, we can't leave that alone. All right, if you want to leave, go ahead and leave. I'm changing this one to something. Let's see. Let's change this to CSS is here. All right. So we've got those 3 set up. We've now got horizontal. They don't stick to the top. The vertical ones do until you hit the base of their container, and then they stay there. And all the HTML and the CSS are done and good to go. Now, next time is where we're going to get into the object-oriented programming style of thinking when it comes to JavaScript, and I hope you'll stick around for that. If you want to see that, go ahead and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks again for watching. Happy coding.